Open your mind.
The good doctor is in the house. The house. The good doctor. The good doctor.
Open your mind.
In the house. The house. The good doctor in the house. The house. The house. The house.
Open your mind.
And peace, folks. Welcome back to another edition of the Proper Thought series right here on the old T.P.O.T. YouTube page. I'm your host, X, of course, but you knew that already. That's why your black asses are here. Special edition of Ask the Doc tonight. We're going to have Dr. Lorenzo T. NEAL is going to be on the show. And as you can see scrolling down here in these parts here, see how it's going? You can see down here that we will be talking about the good, the bad, and the ugly of the church. But y'all always know, before we get started, I always like to start the show with thanking you good folks for everything that you do, man. You know, your likes, your shares, your views, your subscriptions, and of course, your hard-earned pennies, nickels, dimes, quarters, and 50-cent pieces. Because I know you don't have to do it, man. You don't have to look at these videos. You don't have to like them. You don't have to share them. You don't have to subscribe to this channel. And you definitely don't have to throw down your hard-earned coins on this platform. But you good folks choose to do so, man. Over and over again, I tell y'all, man, I appreciate all of you good folks. I'm humbled. I'm honored. I'm enamored with the support that I get. This channel has grown organically, and I know it's not just because of me. I know it's because of you good folks out there, man, and I want y'all to know, man, that I appreciate y'all. I don't take y'all lightly, and I thank y'all. All right. So let's get at it. I'm waiting for the good doctor. Y'all know on the Ask the Doc series, we actually take questions after we do our little bit of interviewing. So, but a surprise for y'all, the doctor isn't an MD now. No, he's not an MD. The good doctor is a doctor of theology. He's a what do they call it? Theologian. So we got a different kind of doctor in the house tonight. So that means we're going to be having a different round of questioning, if you will. Because like y'all see, we're going to be talking about the good, the bad, and the ugly of the church tonight. And we're going to be doing it in that order. So get your questions ready. Those of you who have never heard of the good doctor, The good doctor is a pastor. He's a pastor. I believe he's the lead pastor at New Bethel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Jackson, Mississippi. He's been a theologian for, I believe, about 3 decades. He can correct me when he comes on if I'm wrong. Yeah, and we're gonna get at it tonight, man. We're gonna get at it, and we're gonna talk about this thing tonight, man. You know, I'm just waiting now for the good doctor to get in. I did send him the link. I do believe, yeah, I did send him the link already. So we're just waiting. Lots going on, man. I was riding today, and y'all know that we live in a time now where it's a lot of homeless folks, man. And I was riding by today and I saw Tent City, because we haven't been down amongst Tent City in a while. Because my wife, she go down there and give everybody $5 and give everybody a plate of chicken and mashed potatoes and potato salad and all that kind of stuff. But we haven't done any of that since this COVID thing hit. And I was looking down there today and I was like, wow. And I got home, and on the news, they were talking about they're giving them 72 hours to get up out of there. And it's rough on a lot of those people, man, because I think it's about 150 people down there. I'm not sure, because like I said, since this COVID thing hit, my wife and myself, we haven't been down there. But I do see it, in my travels when I'm coming back and forth, and I'm working around the city. I do see it. And I don't know what's going to happen to those folks, man, because they're making them get up out of there. They got 72 hours. I think they got to be out of there by Friday, and they want them up out of there because, the rats and the garbage and the sanitation crisis. And, it's tough, man. And I'll probably do a story about it next week. So y'all be looking forward to that. But I believe the good doctor is here. Dr. NEAL.
Good evening.
How are you, sir?
I'm well, thank you. Just trying to stay warm in this crazy freezing weather we have down here in Mississippi.
Yeah, man. I heard y'all getting a cold snap down there. I'm in North Carolina, so it's kind of swept across us. We're getting a little bit of rain here and there, but it was actually pretty sunny today. Not to rub it in, Doc, but
I don't know. We had a little sunshine yesterday, but it's been steadily snowing, sleeting, and all of that. But it's still good.
So let's get right into it, man. I was telling the folks that you are a pastor in Mississippi. You are the pastor at New Bethel AME Church, correct?
Yes.
You are a theologian. You've been a theologian for quite some time. I believe you've been a pastor ever since you were a teenager, right?
I was licensed to preach. I accepted my call to preach when I was 12, and I was licensed to preach at 16, and I've been pastoring, interim pastoring since about 17, 18, in ordained pastoral ministry since 1995.
Okay.
Well,
go ahead.
Noise.
Go ahead. You got it, Doc.
But I began my ministry in the Baptist church and now in the African Methodist Episcopal church. And nearly 30 years, actually next year would be 30 years in ministry.
Quite some time. Well, usually on these Ask the Doc series, we usually have a medical doctor, some type of MD or psychologist. So this is the first time that we've actually had a doctor that's not a medical doctor. So this is new for us here.
And psychologist, so
okay, that'll work. But I wanted you to come on tonight, Doc, because I wanted to talk about the church. Um, the church, as far as black folks go, it's always been a staple place for us. Um, Even when it was the quote unquote what's that word? Hush Harbor. Is that what it was called?
Brush Harbor.
Yeah. And what people don't know what that means. And what that means is that was a place where people met secretly
Mm-hmm.
and had religion secretly, right?
That's correct. Yes.
So, I mean, the black church, I mean, because I was raised by church folk, I had bishops and ministers and pastors in my family, uh, Sunday school teachers. I was raised by church folk, actually raised in the church for the most part. Can't y'all tell? But I was raised in the church like many of us were. And the things that I see today in the church, Doc, those things are somewhat familiar because I kind of saw them, back then. Um, I didn't understand them as much when I was a kid because I kind of got away from the church, once I got to be a teenager and got cool. Once coolness set in, that was kind of it, for the church. But some of the things that I see today, um, I saw back then. And I wanted to talk to you about the good, the bad, and the ugly of the church. So let's start with the good. Um, like I said, the church is a staple place for many black folks. A lot of our educational institutions kind of evolved from the black church
Mm-hmm.
as well. And I know a lot of people have turned their lives around due to the church. So won't you go into the good of the black church, if you will, Doc?
Yeah, exactly right. Uh, Historically, the black church, as we call it, there's some who say there's no distinction between the church, uh, but the black form of Christian worship, if I could be explicit about it, um, has long been the staple in the community. It served not only as the place of worship, but it served as the conception for many of our social institutions, for many of our fraternal institutions, and for many of our educational institutions. Since as as early as the 18th century, with the founding of the A.B. Church by Richard Allen, the independent black church has really resonated. It resonated and personified the idea of liberation that black people wanted and needed. It gave them that sense. And when you talk about meeting in the brush arbor and places like that, it was the one place for those few moments in time that they could have this sense of freedom, where they could sing, they could dance, and be spirited into a sense of exuberation about that moment, where the preacher, even though unlearned as that person may have been, could vocalize the story. The black church has always been about, preaching, but about telling the story. And as a kid, that's the one thing I learned. As a kid preacher, you want to tell the story, and so we've gotten into the history of uh, the griot for American heritage, or American Christian heritage. We are the griots. We tell the story through the lens of the black experience, and it's been that way for generations. That's the good thing. We developed in the black church. You hear a lot about singers, secular singers, talking about they learned their craft in the black church. A lot of musicians learn their craft in the black church, and certainly those who are public figures, who are gifted in oratory and persuasion and other rhetorical skills. Many of them drew from the black church. Matter of factly, the public speaking of just Reverend Jesse Jackson is an example of that. The rhyme and the syntax that he uses came from the rhetoric and preaching of the black church. So that's the good thing. We helped identify and establish a sense of pride, identity, and freedom that was not able to be experienced outside the context of those who were enslaved. So, yeah, that's the good.
Well, we also know that there is some bad. Uh, but I don't want to get into that right now. I want to talk about some of the good if I can.
Okay.
Um, I know when I was coming up, like I said, I was raised by, church folk. And a lot of things that we did either included the church or was, precipitated by the church. Um, Family reunions,
Mm.
uh, barbecues, uh, fundraisers, dinners. Like when I was a kid, all of that stuff was like connected to the church. I mean, it all was connected to the church. Everyone knows, I was raised by a landscaper, a landscape architect, and I know we used to cut the grass at the church.
Wow.
We did the hedges. I mean, we would do painting, brickwork, So I was always, when I was a kid, I was always somewhere around a church because I had pastors and preachers and, they were my family members. So I was always in and out of a church, on church grounds, going to church functions. And one of the good things that I found about that is that whenever the church was involved, whenever the church was involved, it was always this big, grandiose thing. And it felt like family, even though it may be 150, 200 people there, it seemed like family. It was always seemed like a family thing, it always seemed that way. And I know that the people from the church, when I was coming up as a little kid, they were always the people to look out for the less fortunate. Like if someone couldn't pay their rent or someone couldn't pay their lights or their water or their whatever. I remember one time the church got together and bought someone a car, feed folks, that kind of stuff. Those are the things I remember. Those are the good things I remember um, as a younger kid. The church was always connected to helping people. When people got help, out of a bind, out of a situation or a crisis, it was always like the church, was like somewhere in the midst of it or totally involved with it. Like I said, I seen the church buy people cars, pay people rent, feed folks, give people clothes, help people find a place to stay, that kind of stuff, and I had that idea about the church when I was a little kid. But as I start to become a teenager, that's when I start noticing some of the bad. Yeah, that's when I start noticing some of the bad.
Yeah.
Cause I remember clearly when I was about maybe 14, I remember the pastor, one of the pastors, he had two of the girls in the congregation pregnant. My grandfather, who was a bishop, shoot, he had to be in his late 60s. Boy, my grandfather had quite a few girlfriends, and I would be with him, and it was strange to me because he was the bishop. I mean, he was up there, and man, my grandfather had all kinds of girlfriends, man. He had, I don't even know how many. I would be in the car with him and he would go in the house and not come out for like an hour, And I was like 14 years old. I used to take his car, he had a big old Cadillac with white wall tires on it and everything. And I would take his Cadillac around the block and all that kind of stuff. So, when you see that kind of stuff, especially as a young person, it kind of thwarts your view
Oh, yes.
of church because you hear the preachers preach this message, Doc, and then you see that same preacher who's preaching, you see him involved in that kind of mess. So Well, what you got on that, Doc?
Unfortunately, I can identify with your story also, regarding, uh, especially as a when I was a as a kid in preaching ministry, and being mentored by a lot of older pastors. I was able to see some of the things that I shouldn't have seen as a kid, and I mean, it's only by the grace of God that I have not fallen into that same pattern, and I'm just grateful. It takes a lot of discipline and prayer, of course. Um, but let me backtrack to your statement first regarding the role of the church in the broader community, and how benevolence played a big role in that. I go back to Richard Allen in 1787, after he and his members were put out of St. George's Church in Philadelphia, uh, being racially discriminated. The white folk just got tired of them worshiping, and Richard Allen and others formed what was called the Free African Society, which was basically a benevolent society, and they looked after and cared for both free and enslaved people within the general Philadelphia area. And again, that carried on throughout the church, and Allen's church was not the only church doing that. You had other churches like Alfred Street Church in the DC metro area, and many other churches around the country did that. And it continued to be a big part of the Black church experience, the benevolence part. And in fact, every church I've ever served at and had the privilege of ministering at had some form of a benevolence fund. My church currently, we still do that, and we have during this pandemic have made sure to use that fund advantageously to those who have been directly impacted in our community. And yeah, we had to stop giving money directly to people. We had to go through a process, but for a long period of time, the people would they would come, ask the church, can you pay a bill? Can you do this? And most times they would. But we've had, there's some who had the game, they lived off the church. And so that is a good part of the church, that the community of benevolence, as I would call it, has been a tremendous part of the Black church experience. And it has carried the community of Black church a long way. Now, on the bad part, unfortunately, with the idea of the morality that comes with the church, and that's something I still wrestle with as a pastor. And believe me, I am by no way as saved as I would like, as some folks saved as I would like to be. The issue that comes down to this, the dissonance of the Black preacher and the rhetoric of the sermon that the Black preacher was pushing for generations. The main message was that of sanctification and coming out of the world, and then preparing yourself for heaven. And of course, you had that tempered with the fire and brimstone messages that made sure people, once they got in church, stayed in church. And unfortunately, there are, no matter what community you go to, you're going to find a story of a Black clergy member abusing the privilege of sharing that message. In some cases, using that message to antagonize believers, to say if they don't, kind of seducing the young female members mostly into saying, well, this is going to ensure that you have a one-way ticket to heaven, a surefire ticket to heaven. And it was one of those open secrets in so many churches.
So does the church kind of have a cult-like effect on some people? Is it, now I'm not talking about all churches, of course, because all preachers aren't impregnating members of the congregation. We know that it's not everybody, but in some instances, is the church sort of like cult-like, where it has so much power, that the church has so much power, and when I say church, I mean, the people in power, the preacher, the pastor.
I would not say cult like. No, you must understand, and I talked about this in my doctoral research in my dissertation. Um, the church is, especially in the black church, is largely an extension of the family of origin. So you have within one congregation, you can have two or three families. Hustler, dude. Sorry. You can have two or three families, and they're all related, and they have their circles and systems of power that is established within that. And in churches where the pastor is elected, there can be that sense of, once they get to a certain degree of influence within families and within the broader community of the church, where their influence becomes more than the preacher. So, in that sense, the followers see no harm as long as the church seems to be prospering. They'll allow certain things to go on as long as it doesn't interfere with the direct growth, more specifically with the financial and numerical growth of the community of the church. But a large part of that goes back again to what I stated earlier regarding our history. Meeting in secret and men divining themselves. In other words, those men who showed or displayed greater acts of faith and proclamation were deemed, with the power. They were basically given the rule, and that continues on to this generation. To this day, there are a lot of pastors who use their position, their influence, and their sense of power and authority to manipulate others to get what they want to do. And that's why you have incidents where, a pastor can have two or three women in the congregation, all have children by them, and and people just sweep it under the rug until the pastor starts messing up with money.
Mm.
And when the pastor starts messing up with money, then that's when it everything hits the fan. And I know of too many stories with that, inappropriation of both funds and members has collided and brought a lot of strife and led to a lot of uh, inward turmoil and eventually, in some cases, separation and splits. It's a sad thing, but again, it's not so much a direct reflection on the black church as much as it is on the reflection of how we engage those who are in authority. What power we give them and what influence we allow them to have over our immediate life. Um, and again, because the black church experience is integrated into the broader community of the black living experience, uh, pastors were expected to have a whole lot of freedom. Give the pastor a whole lot and let the pastor do what he or she, and now in the cases she, let them do what they want to do as long as it's not directly impacting us personally. We're gonna be okay.
Hmm. Has that been your experience in your years,
Oh,
of has that been your experience to see um churches driven by the mighty dollar as opposed to being driven by the mighty God?
oh yeah, yeah. In my younger years, uh, when I was pastoring, when I was a bivocational pastor in my early 20s, I was attracted to the new wave of the prosperity gospel and all of that. All right, little dude. And that was attractive to me and many other. So, you go to these churches, there's this charismatic worship experience, uh, and the preacher's all flashy, and you 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 want to be like that preacher, and that preacher you later discover has not just flaws morally, but also, puts the church in fiscal jeopardy because the lifestyle that they try to, or not try to, some of them did live, extravagant lifestyles, put the membership in great fiscal jeopardy. And some were unapologetic about it. Others eventually relented and shifted away from preaching such things. But for the most part, in my own personal experience, I was trying to imitate that because that seemed to be what was the right thing to do. If you were following God, you're supposed to be wealthy. If you were following God, you're supposed to be able to have this sphere of influence and all of that. And I had to repent, and I'm glad I learned all of that in my early 20s. So by the time, I got into my 30s, I was a little more mature, uh, and able to handle the greater wealth that came, not because of preaching, but because I was bivocational for about 2 decades before became a full-time ministry, but because I had a greater appreciation for the resources that were being provided to me by God, and I was able to be a better steward of those resources, and I had a better appreciation of how those resources should be used in my personal ministry. So, I'm not just telling people to quote unquote tithe to the church, but I'm demonstrating it. And I'm not just saying be a blessing to somebody. I am being a blessing to someone, even in doing public worship in some points. I have done that. So, yeah.
So, and we often talk about this, online, in these circles. We talk about how the church doesn't really appeal to black men. It's often said that the bulk of the congregation is just women. There's no room, for black men. The church doesn't really put out a message to black men, and in fact, black men have been somewhat, ostracized and marginalized
Yes.
uh, in the black church. So speak to that, if you will.
It's very interesting, and again, this is part of the dissonance that we face in the black church. We know, for example, that the black women drive the black church. I would not be able to do what I do, live how I live, because I'm in full-time employee of my local congregation. Because the women make sure they're the ones that are ensuring that the things that are necessity for the church are taken care of. Now the men, they take the lead, but they're greatly influenced by the women to ensure that they do that. The other thing is, unfortunately, over the last 3 or 4 decades, there's been a slow emergence of femininity in the church. Not just the influence of women in leadership, because now women are, again, they're not just in the pews, but they're in the pulpit. In African Methodism, we have now elected and consecrated three women bishops, four women bishops. I'm sorry. We have three active now, female bishops. I'm at two active bishops, female bishops, and one retired. But we have women serving as presiding elders. We have women serving in major pulpits that shifts the essence of how we actually worship, you know, and in the broader sphere of the church. We always know that I've been to church. I was a church musician, and yeah, I pastored and I played for different churches. From churches that were separate from where I pastored. I sometimes two or three churches I play for on a Sunday. But in the music part of the church, of what we call music ministry of the church, a lot of it is effeminized. We had effeminate males singing in choirs, playing on the instruments and whatnot, and you knew Again, you knew that you were going to have a wonderful church experience if you had this type of group in the church. And for the most part, the sisters enjoyed the fact that these brothers were up there sensing and relating and feeling like them, emoting like them in the worship experience. Whereas traditionally men were, you know, tough and somber in our worship, with, you know, with few cases where in more Pentecostal circles the men were a little more expressive. But uh, the only time you really got expressive men is when you had the deacons praying and the preachers preaching, tuning up at the end of the sermon. But for the most part, it was all those women driving the emotivity, the emotional part of the church. So it would be with the women singing, and it would be the women shouting, it would be the women fainting, and all of that that brought the worship experience in totality for them. But it was the men, demonstrating the leadership. And now we have that shift that's literally has been happening for the last uh, quarter of a century at least. That shift to the point where men no longer, masculine men, let me put it that way, masculine men no longer really feel capable of showing up and serving holily, holistically in the church. And it's a sad thing because it that rolls over into the broader community and the broader Black living experience. Because when you see, uh, I'll give you an example. I, I once attended the church pretty frequently where it was a female pastor, and she was married, and she was the pastor. The husband had no role in the church, and most times he would be sitting in the back. Now she called him deacon, and she gave him the title, but he really had no function. And because that type of leadership was there, most of the women were strong-willed. And at the time, I was married, and they were trying to influence my ex-wife to be like them, strong-willed over their husband. And I was not like, I was not having it. Like, no, we're not going here anymore. That's not how it should flow. You know, and I know there's this sense of patriarchy and all of that, but there's a distinct, uh, very distinction between patriarchy and white civilization versus patriarchy and the Black civilization. If you take out that in the Black church, you literally are like the songwriter who says, sometimes I feel like a motherless child, except you replace motherless with fatherless.
Mm.
And you have this loose sense of identity. But for men, the identity is rooted in an feminine expression. And it, it, it's one of those dissonance again. We're not sure how to adequately address or articulate without offending or hurting somebody. But the reality is Black men are leaving the church, and
Mm.
they're leaving
Do
the
you
not
do
because they don't have faith. They're leaving the church because they have no praxis in the faith.
mm. Do you think that, because I was always taught, coming up, um, that the church, the influence of the church was supposed to spread out into, society. Do you think that that's backwards now? Has the influences of the greater society, has it seeped into the church instead of the other way around?
Absolutely, and part of that is integration. um, for example, you go back to shortly after moments we were fully reintegrated into society in the mid to late 60s. We started seeing more independent Black churches planted, particularly in the late 70s and early 80s. We started seeing uh, a large group of independent, unaffiliated Black churches. Uh, And I give you the prime example, the late Reverend or Apostle Dr. Fred Casey Price, um, who began his ministry in the denomination in two separate denominations, but then branched out from those denominations, forming his own independent congregation that at the height of his ministry was one of the largest in the world. I mean, well, not in the world, but in the country. And, he built a facility that was unlike any other in the country. Matter of fact, buying a whole college campus, refurbishing and revamping it to fit the needs of his ministry. You fast forward 20 years to Thomas Dexter Jakes, Sr., T.D. Jakes, and he leaves a small congregation in West Virginia that only had less than 1,000 members. He takes those families and he plants those families in Dallas. And within 4 to 5 years of planting that, he has a membership that exceeds most of the churches. Matter of fact, it exceeded most black mega churches at the time. And then building off that, you had persons like Eddie Long, the late Eddie Long, who served at a Baptist church, a traditional Baptist church, taking on the mantle of a semi-Pentecostal church field and grow his church from a few hundred to tens of thousands. Also, you had Bishop Paul Morton, who did the same thing. And I had the privilege of attending Bishop Morton's church several times as a kid in Louisiana. They took this idea of church growth that was pushed by evangelical Christians at the time, and they took that and melded it with not just a social gospel, but a gospel infused with emotion. And then you add the perks of being a part of that hip church. That's the hip church, and people would come just to be acquainted. And there are many other churches like that. But on the flip side of that, you had churches like First A&B in Los Angeles, who was then led by Reverend Chip Murray. And you take what he did, instead of focusing on church growth and evangelism, he focused on outreach and community and grew the church. And it was a different type of feel and function. One led to a church environment that was highly emotive and less engaging communally, as far as the church being a broader extension of the family. And the other intentionally saying, no, you are a part of a family, and because you're a part of the family, you're a part of a direct community that needs your direct impact. And so that we get this mega church trend now that's popular, where people will flock to the hippest church as long as you got the right choir, the right sound, and all of that, versus coming to a contemporary church like mine, which is really structured, denominational. People have this sense of restriction instead of freedom. And there's a great difference. Whereas historically, the black church, the experience that churches like mine and others offer that seems restricted was the one that was the most liberating. Because it calls you to look inward and then work outward. Whereas now, most church models calls you not to look inward to work outward, but to look inward just to look inward, to be better. So it's kind of like a selfish worship experience where the church will have thousands of people, and thousands of people will lift their hands, sing a song, dance, and the music will be right. But outside of that, there is no outward engagement to the community or the faith heritage that they are connected to.
And that's probably the case with all those churches who have these big old satellite dishes sitting there. Because I'm in the South, and I ride up and down Billy Graham Parkway, And Billy Graham, they got this big old gigantic complex, and there's satellite dishes all over the place. And I'm like, wow.
Yeah.
Does the word of God need to be broadcasted on such devices? I just be, joking or whatever, but I say it to my wife. I'm like, does the word of God need to be broadcasted over all these big gigantic satellite dishes? But what I want to ask you is this: do you think that because a church like yours in Jackson, Mississippi, and this is just my opinion, because how I grew up, I didn't go to, my people didn't preach at this big giant church with 20,000 people in it. There may have been 100 people, in the whole church. But do you think, in your opinion, that there is more of the quote unquote church/Christianity, love of God experience in a church that has a congregation of 150 people as opposed to a congregation with 30,000? Are you getting a full church experience when you're going into something that's the size of Madison Square Garden? Is it the same thing?
No, it is not the same thing. And here's we have to go back to the first century when the church was birthed. Again, the church was birthed out of both an oppressive regime of the Roman Empire and out of individuals who were finding a way to circumvent all the religious litigations and laws that they were restricted to. That was the original intent of the church, to get them free of that under this figure of the Messiah, Jesus of Nazareth, relinquishing the idea of a law that told them everything to do to a relationship, reconciled relationship that not only told them what to do, but gave them the freedom to be who they were. And Paul writes about that in 1 Corinthians 8, or people offended about what they ate or anything like that. So the church, the original intent of the church was all about intimacy. And in the Last Supper with Jesus and his disciples, you had 13 males. There may have been some females present, but we aren't certain of that. But we know at least 13 men, Jesus and 12 apostles, were intimately going through the Passover feast, where Jesus allowed himself to be vulnerable and say, okay, this is the last time we're going to do this. And every time you gather in moments like this, you should be gathering in memory of me, doing this moment, in replication of this moment. Do it in memory of me, because I'm going to be gone. So there's always been a sense of intimacy that was with the church. And then again, back with the Black church, as the Black churches were being formed in the 18th and 19th centuries. Again, it was the intimacy. Some were free, some were enslaved, but they found a means, even though some of them couldn't even speak the same language in some cases. They found a way of creating an intimate community around that experience. And for the longest of times, that was the case. And you did have bursts of places like Abyssinian Baptist Church in New York City, where they were at one time the largest Black congregation in the country, probably even the largest in the country. But they still had that intimacy under Adam Clayton Powell Sr. and Jr., and now under Emmanuel Butts. They still have that sense of intimacy that is required to be in communion. That's what the church is really all about, being in communion with one another. And then, like what we call the sacrament, or old folks say the sacrament, or the Lord's Supper. It's supposed to be an intimate experience. This is a very reverent moment, because you are again re-inviting or recreating the moment where Jesus was intimate with those persons, and in celebratory fashion, we do the same. You can't do that. Well, I won't say you can't, um, because a lot of times, and I've been to these large churches just to visit sometimes, and you feel out of place, even though they may have a welcome song and they may give you a welcome gift. You still feel like a visitor. Whereas you come to a small church in anywhere. Before I put it this way, I pastored a church in Pickens, Arkansas, that was in the middle of a cotton field. Literally, I do mean literally in the middle of a cotton field. And when we did have visitors, I mean, the members were quick to welcome them and make them feel welcome. You know, even if they got lost on the back road leading to the church. They weren't trying to come to the church, but they got lost and they saw, oh, this is a church, we'll stop. And that happened at times. Or to the church where I was serving, that was on the bayou in South Louisiana, and across the train track was a riverboat casino, literally. And the members, not the members, but the people who wanted to get lucky would come to the worship service before they went to the casino, because the church and the casino were on the same little road, and they'd see that there are cars there, even though that the building looked like it was, closed. But they see there were cars there, and they just pop up, and you gave them the worship, you gave them this sense of welcoming. And hopefully you pray for them to spend a little money, win a little money, and give a little money.
Yeah. 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 Folks, we are here with Dr. LORENZO Neal, pastor at New Bethel AME Church in Jackson, Mississippi. And we are discussing the good, the bad, and the ugly of the church. I want to ask you, because we're gonna get into some of the ugly of the church.
Yeah.
Good doctor. We spoke earlier a few moments ago about how the greater society is making its way into the church, and some of those elements that aren't consistent, with the literature of the Bible has made their way into the church. When you talk about homosexuality, when you talk about transgender, when you talk about, the whole LGBT thing, a lot of that has made its way into the church. Do you believe that that's a good thing? That stuff that's not traditionally part of the Bible has made its way into the church?
Well, yeah, it is a good thing, because, again, we follow the model of Jesus of Nazareth, who was very much affirming in so many ways. Not in the sense that he approved or disproved of people's lifestyles. We find in record a gospel, uh, in a gospel where he meets a woman at a well, who he, by divination and revelation, realizes that she's been married 5 times, and the person she was with was not her husband. We also find where he encounters a woman who was, quote unquote, caught in the act of adultery, and was, since to call judgment on her, whether she should die or stay alive. And we also find him encountering Mary Magdalene, who, by all accounts, was a woman who had been demon possessed, and some accounts state that she was a former prostitute. So that does align with the character of Jesus as we read in the Gospels. It does not align with some of the more fiery rhetoric we find in the Old Testament, or some of the rhetoric we find in the writings of Paul, uh, which, again, that's part of the wonderful dissonance that we have as a community of faith. We have this book that in one place says it's an abomination, but then the person we model or to model our faith after seems to affirm what would be deemed abominative behaviors. And then you come back, you have a sole author uh, who apparently was celibate, single, and a bit more stern, with the expectation that in his lifetime, Jesus would come back and they'd all go to heaven. And so he had this sense of urgency as far as, hey, do everything right, because if you do anything wrong, you might miss the boat. And I'm strongly paraphrasing that. So it would be, Jesus would be affirming, and having persons of that in the church only enhances the sense of community. The love of God shed abroad from our hearts to others. It does that. Now, the issue again, and this is mostly within Western Christianity, and uh, Western Christianity is strongly influenced by a European Puritan uh, doctrine, a dogma. We didn't get ours from the Ethiopian church. We didn't get it from any other church there in the area where the first century church was birthed. We get our current theological orientations from Puritan, European Puritan perspective. And then you add to that the Victorian temperance facade, and you get what we have now as the American church. And the black church, for the most part, so willing to want to be mainstream during the early 19th century. Early 19th century, especially post-Civil War, going into the 20th century, so wanting to be mainstream, we began to buy into that orthodoxy. So while we were preaching holiness and sanctification, well, towards, when we bought into the Victorian temperance and all the other stuff to be recognized as mainline, we did more damage to ourselves, because we've always been a liberating body. It doesn't matter what the denomination affiliation was. The black church has always been a liberating body. It was about liberation. And we have to get back to those roots. And there's a way we can preach liberation, we can preach affirmation and all of that without fully negating the experience of a human being. Because what one person may be as part of the LGBT community, and that all that is affiliated with that, well, we still have to deal with the fornicators, we still have to deal with the adulterers, we still have to deal with the gamblers, we still have to deal with all those folk. And we want to say, though their sins are not as visible in many cases, their sins are not as visible, we still allow them to come, and we'll talk about them, we'll preach about them, but we still gonna take their money. We're gonna still let them hold positions of leadership. And again, that's a dissonance we cannot afford as a black church, because again, the totality of our identity rests in the sense that we were birthed out of the need for liberation. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, well, I was always told, by my parents, and my grandparents, who were deeply involved in the church, that sin is sin. That's what I always heard. Sin is sin, son. It don't matter, which sin it is. It's all sin. So I can't say that I actually agreed, but that is that's the standard. No sin is greater than the other sin, so I guess that's kind of what we're taught, and that's what we're indoctrinated with for the most part. but I want to ask you about something else. We talked about money. I believe on any given year, the black church takes in, last I checked, $70 billion per year, collectively. Why do we not see? Why is that not reflected? Those billions of dollars, and it may be more than that. I may be off a few digits. These billions of dollars that find their way into the black church. How come none of that is it? How come none of that is more reflected in black society?
Man, that's a good question there. I always used to laugh. I would go to churches and they have 3 or 4 offerings, and I was always wondering what would the offering, because they would never specify what the offerings were going to. You know, you just give a faith offering, or those churches with the eternal building funds. uh, One building fund for the last 40 years, and the church has plenty of money, but it's still not reflecting um, reflecting what the needs of the community are actually have. Um, I think a large part of that is due to the sense there's this uh, I'd say it's twisted sense of what a pastor is. Um, pastors now, we are having to function like CEOs because our churches are not-for-profit organizations, which means they function as a business entity, and many pastors now themselves brand themselves in a like manner. So the money that it will come in that could go out back into the community doesn't. Now there are exceptions to that. There, again, I mentioned Alfred Street Baptist Church, which has in many ways, number of times under the leadership of Dr. John Howard. I mean Howard John Wesley. Oh, yeah. Um, has given back to his community, and then many others, that countless others. We do it. We don't do it to the scale that some of these churches that have the finances do, but we do. Um, it has to come back. It has come back to the leadership. Pastors having to realize that the black church, or the local black church, is, a collection of people who are to serve this present age. And if the pastor does not promote that, the members will not engage that. And if the members don't engage that, they gonna give that money to the church, because in many cases they want their church to stay open. They want their church to look good, but they don't care about the immediate surroundings of the church. And that's a sad state of affairs. The other part of that is, as we have become more prosperous collectively as a black people, the more money we've earned, we wanted our uh, worship edifices to reflect our wealth. So we'll put more money into building a building that states that this church has money and people, than to uh, and churches are tax exempt and property tax exempt in many cases. So they will they say, well, this is our money and we're just gonna keep it. And instead of teaching generational wealth through the church, which was done in the first half, the 1700s and 1800s and the early part of the 1900s, that was one of the biggest things of the church, building generational wealth. But once we moved out of the hoods, and once we moved out of the community, I'll give you an example. The community where I live and pastor was once a very thriving middle class black community. But once those older members and people who owned their own houses literally built the church that I pastor, physically built it, and other things, once they died off, their children didn't see the value in the houses, didn't see value in any of that. So they were selling houses or they're renting the houses so they could get the income. And here 20 years later or 30 years later, what you see is a ghetto, a hood.
Mm.
There's no thriving businesses there, or foreigners come in, they can put a gas station there, they can put a liquor store there that black people patronize. And if a black person put a business there, they would, they wouldn't receive the same kind of patronization. It's baffling to me that many of our churches don't push economic development, um, or community development as they should. It's a sad reflection on how we view not just the souls of black folk, but the souls of our ancestors.
Mm. Yeah, that leads into the next question I want to ask you, Dr. Neal, because we get on media, and I used to do it myself. That's kind of how I started in media. I started in media, reporting on killings and murders and killings of children and killings by by ways of the police. That's how I started in media, like more than a decade ago. But what my question is this: it's actually a twofold question. Does the church have a responsibility to the community that it's inside of? And also, when you think about places like New York, Chicago, Detroit, places where men are dying by the dozens every week. Now, I've walked those streets. I've been on those streets where brothers are killed every week. And when I do a 360, what I can see on every corner is a church. Yep. So I say to myself, with all of these churches here, this place should be inundated with holy folk. It should be nothing but holy folk here. So why is it that with all these places where all these killings and stuff take place, with all these churches around, how come the church is not more involved with, number one, trying to prevent some of these things, and number two, having an active role when these things happen to keep them from happening again?
That's an excellent question. And I'll give you a two-part answer. The first part is because I've been directly impacted by gun violence. I lost my mother in 1980. Matter of fact, today is her birthday. She would be 66 if she were alive. She was 25 years old. She was killed in an act of domestic violence that involved a gun at 25 years old, leaving behind 4 boys, myself and 3 of my brothers. I've also lost my 18-year-old nephew, Kevin Neal Jr.
Yes. I read that in your bio. I
Yeah,
read it in your bio.
2016, he was killed in the senseless act of gun violence. So I have been personally infected by gun violence. And when I was a teacher in a public school in South Louisiana, I lost a band student. I was a band director. I lost a student to gun violence. Student playing, what we would call accidental shooting or unintentional shooting. Only at 14 years old, lost his life to another one of his friends playing with a gun. And so that's my personal relationship with gun violence. And just a week ago, I lost one of my young men that I had mentored over the last 10 years. Well, when I first came to this church, when I was first appointed, he was there. He was just 17, 18 years old. And I mentored him, let him live in the housing the church provided. We had apartments back then. He stayed there. I mentored him. And just a week ago, he was shot and killed in an ambush. I directly address gun violence because of my personal impact by it. And I travel the country sharing the story about my mother and my nephew. But also, the sad thing that I've realized is like in the city of Jackson last year, we had the highest number of gun violence death, gun homicides, where nearly 200 and almost 300 people were shot and wounded, and over 100 people were killed as a direct result. Now, we had rally after rally. I was at prayer vigil with the chief of police, and I was there, and along with the chaplains, who are a lot of them are also pastors of the police department. We would pray. We had rallies, and yet the gun violence didn't cease. It actually increased. And add to that, when George Floyd was killed, the rallies that we had became insignificant. People were flocking by the thousands and hundreds, marching in that. We couldn't get 24 people to come to a rally for gun violence. I personally walk the streets of I literally live around the corner from my church. I live in, the church parsonage. I live in the church parsonage. I walk through the community every single day. The people in the community know me. They know to come knock on the church door if they see my vehicle there. And some have even learned where I live. And they would come and knock on, Pastor, can you help me? Pastor, can you give me a ride? And I said all of that to say that we have to be engaged. We have to not make violence of any kind, domestic violence, gun violence, sexual violence, sexual trafficking, all of that. We can't distance that. We have to empathize with those persons who are experiencing it, who have been impacted by it, and it has to be a part of our liturgy. When we worship, we have to mention it. We have to say the names of the victims. We have to address, because the scripture addresses violence. It has violent stories in there. People who have been raped and all of that, killed. That's in scripture. And we have to lift those scriptures that give purpose to those same stories. The second point is, because the Black church was birthed out of oppression, the need to get a sense of liberation from their enslavement, in most cases enslavement, and because of the Brush Harbor experience, there's a sense of nihilism that is underlying within the Black worship experience. To address that nihilism, for most persons, the Black church, the Black preacher would put the focus on heaven. So you work to get out of here, not work to stay here. And because, we were singing about the old ship of Zion, we were singing, we preach about the mansion just over in the glory land. We preach about the 12 gates to the city and the streets of gold. We preached that language and rhetoric because the people had that nihilism. And the church was one place for a few hours that they could escape the nihilism that they were experiencing, the existential crises that they were experiencing within their real world. And that still lingers today. And again, it comes, that's the disjoint that we see when it comes to the Black faith, the Black the current Black church religious experience. Because you can go to a church and, as they say, leave the same way you came in. No direct relational experience, no direct communal experience. And when there's no direct connection to engage you, you become disenfranchised from the external world. Even if the church is located in the hood, all you gotta do is drive in, make sure your car is locked, and make sure the church has proper security. And when the service is over, you leave as quick as you can and getting out of there. And hey, I forget about the condition of that community where I go to worship, because that's where I always been worshiping, whether I want to or not. That's where mama worship. That's where daddy worship. So I can't leave. I got to stay. And so we have to address the nihilism that is within the Black church, from its inception to its current existence. Because once we really truly address that, we find the liberating text in the scripture really become a part of our experience, our lived experience. And when it becomes a part of our lived experience, we do all we can to be very vigilant addressing the crises that we are facing. You know, for example, I have a lot of brothers and sisters who are more conservative leading, and so they'll put abortion as the number one issue, and they'll say abortion is killing black children and black families and all of that. They'll make that and they'll run with that with the support of white evangelicals who don't care about black lives when they're in prison. So, or they may not care about, they're gonna tout the gun. And mind you, I'm a gun owner, second amendment right person, but they'll say, well, I'll support that. And if these black men are unable to control themselves and the angst and anxiety they experience, and they take it out on another black man, then that's on them, not on me. And unfortunately, that same attitude is within us, within the black church. And we just have to really be direct in addressing it. And I said, as much as I would rather march, I'm not marching if we can't get 1,000 people to protest when Pookie and Ray Ray are shot and killed on the block, instead of a black man who has been killed by a police officer. Then what good is our faith?
I have to agree with that one, Doc. Let me ask you about the church's message, because I know a couple brothers wanted me to ask you these questions. I don't know why they asked me. I was going to ask them anyway, but we often say, because we spoke earlier about the congregation of the church primarily being women. Do you think that there's a problem that the fact that the church may be giving women the wrong message? For instance, the whole "you need to pray for your husband" thing, the whole "don't worry, God gonna send you a husband" thing, the fact that the church doesn't, quote unquote, indoctrinate these women to be mindful of how many children they're bearing, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
Is the church failing in that regard, where it's kind of selling women unattainable delusions that are never going to manifest?
I believe, yes, we are guilty of that. And I'm a single man, unmarried male, pastor, and I don't tell folk to come to church to find a good man. I don't preach that. I don't tell the fellas to come to church to find a good woman. I mean, you come to church once you have established a relationship with the Lord through faith, and express that through corporate worship in the church. And unfortunately, again, this is only within the last quarter of a century where this has really been amplified. It's always been, but it's been amplified more over the last quarter of a century, where there's this sense that the church is the answer to the black woman's needs and desires. And they get over spiritual, and it drives men away, because some men don't want the over spiritual woman. They don't mind a woman who have some religious autonomy, but there are those women who will always have something to say about the Lord. And I'm saying it in jest, but it's a reality for a lot of women, because they again have been conditioned to believe that is the means for their salvation, their romantic salvific experience. And I don't think that's sufficient. We have to, and I don't know how to, honestly, I don't really know how to fix this, because I'm part of the problem. I'm part of the problem being a single black man in the church, with no children, but I got a dog who's irritating me right about now. And so the women come looking for men like myself, and they may find them in the sense that they find this man who's attractive, who's successful, and all of that, but morally corrupt. And again, we have to be holistic about how we use the Black church as pastors, as people of faith. It goes back to the conversation that we had earlier about the preachers having multiple girlfriends and all of that.
And, and multiple babies
Yeah,
inside the congregation.
exploiting, exploiting the faith of the women in the church who had good faith in the persons sharing the faith to them. So they have good faith. They place good faith in the preacher, thinking because the preacher is saying all these wonderful words, dressing also good, and oozing sexual charisma. Because I ain't gonna lie, I've been entranced by some of these preachers. I'm just like, man, if I were,
Well,
go ahead.
In a sense, and I've always believed this to be true ever since I became an adult. When you have single women, a bunch of single women, and they're all coming to the church to listen to the pastor give the sermon and preach the word. In a sense, on Sunday, does it appear that you as the pastor or other pastors, not necessarily you, but pastors in general, preachers in general, have they become like the pseudo Sunday husband? Have they become that for
Yes,
many of these women?
absolutely. Just like there's this the work husband uh, thing that's thrown around. Yeah, there vicarious romanticism is found in the church, and there are plenty. And it's rather sad because I've seen it firsthand and have experienced where romantic attention is placed vicariously on the preacher without sometimes the preacher even recognizing that it's happening. And then there are those who know it's happening and take full advantage of it. And we've, again, part of it is the nihilism of the experience we have. If a woman does not feel, and I am not an authority on that, I'm just speaking in generalization, so I do apologize. This is just my opinion.
Do the women hit on you, doctor? Do the women hit on you in the church, doc?
Only the old ones. Only the old ones.
Okay.
Kid, I attract the older women. I can't. No, that's just part. There's a book called The Dark Side of Leadership, and one of the things it addresses, one of the character case studies it talked about was Bill Clinton, and how he had his charisma, and his charisma made him very successful, but also was his downfall, his romantic charisma, that attraction that people had for him, uh, which can be identified as vicarious romantic attraction, led to his downfall. And in the Black church, we in some ways celebrate that. I don't know why we do. Is why a pastor can have a pastor's appreciation and have $10,000 that women will do the chicken dinners, the fish dinners, so they can raise the money to give a good donation to their pastor for the pastor's appreciation, or back in the day, make sure the pastor had the best piece of meat, when it came to the dinner table. Uh, it's things like that we just have to really say, okay, that it's part of our tradition, it's part of our heritage, but at the same time, we know that there are a lot of sheep in wolves' clothing or wolf in sheep's clothing who have taken advantage of their role, their authority. And if it were in the secular community, you know, they'd be arrested. And this is happening now. There are more persons coming forward especially post the Me Too movement since 2017, 18, or whenever this Me Too movement started. There have been a lot of women coming forward. There have been a lot of pastors who are, now on the criminal side of justice because of their exploitation of their role. But churches like mine, AME Church, we are trying to be as proactive as we can, preventative when it comes to clergy sexual misconduct. And clergy sexual misconduct in all forms, it ain't just, the babies or anything, but when it comes to inappropriate language. And I have to catch myself sometimes when I'm preaching and, you say a phrase or something that's not quite inappropriate. It's in the streets and people are familiar with it. It'll get you a whole lot of amens, but at the same time, it negates the reverence of the moment of the preached word. And all of a sudden, people are now in the spirit, but they're not in the spirit because of what you're preaching. They're in the spirit because of what they have become familiar with. They have acquainted themselves with the saying that's familiar, and that's what got them shouting. That's what got them up running. It ain't the word, the per se.
Okay. So let me ask you this. I want to kind of shift a little bit, and I want to ask you what politics entering into the church, because as you know, this good brother here behind me, Pastor Warnock, who I believe preaches in Martin Luther King's church, the late Martin Luther King's church, is now a senator. And, here in the old US of A, there is a quote unquote separation of church and state. So what's your take on, politics entering into the black church? And do you think it's a good merger for the good Reverend Warnock to now be a senator for Georgia?
Actually, it's not a precedent. We have to go back to Reconstruction in the 1870s when the first African Americans were elected to Congress. One of those persons was Hiram Revels, who was AME pastor. He was the pastor, founding pastor of Bethel, historic Bethel Church in Vicksburg. He was also the founding first pastor of Zion Chapel in Natchez, Mississippi. And he was elected as a senator from Mississippi in Reconstruction. He's also the first president of Alcorn State University. And during that time, there was no real, again, the black community, the black political ideology and connection was birthed out of the black church. And you got to think about preachers like Adam Clayton Powell Jr., again, who was pastor of the Abyssinian Church in New York. He had a very successful career in Congress, and he was very influential. He was a very flawed man also. But at the time of him serving in Congress, he had, he had the sway of Congress and a lot of politicians. And in more centralized local politics at the local, black preachers have always been involved. While there's no direct delineation of church and state, black preachers have always been involved in local politics. When it comes to national, that's where it gets a little tricky because national is for the majority, and the majority have always had a negative preference towards blacks, no matter if they were the preacher or not. And we see this even under former President Trump. And though he welcomed black preachers, those black preachers were not from conventional platforms or denominations. They were outsiders connected to people like Paula White and Jeffers and all of those other, his other persons. They were not, you wouldn't have found Bishop John Bryant or you wouldn't have found Jamal Bryant, his son. You wouldn't have found them at the table because they weren't being invited to the table. But at the same time, you go to cities like Baltimore, where you have one of the grossest, one of the richest, and I'm not talking about economically, I'm talking about as far as population wise, of black churches. And you see there a great disinvolvement of the black preachers when it comes to the political system. They serve as endorsers, not endorsers. They serve as as only a means of getting people to vote for a particular party, and that keeps their own people disenfranchised. So hopefully, with Dr. Warnick, now Senator Warnick, once he uh, gets his feet wet, and they're already trying to find a scandal on him, connecting him with a what they call it, a voter fraud scheme. He and Stacey Abrams, they are already trying to disingenuate him as a senator and as a clergy person, and so that just goes to show you why, at the broader scale, a lot of black preachers don't get involved in politics, and mind you, this was not his first. He thought to run several years ago, but I guess with the passing of several several leaders, he threw his hat in, and had it not been for some good bloopers on behalf of the Republicans, he may not have gotten elected.
Yeah, I can agree with that. Um, does well, does the black church operate outside or inside of, you know, the politics at hand? You spoke of, many churches being involved with local politics, but is it more to the quote unquote souls to the polls thing? Is it just the preacher say, okay, go and vote for Mr. X, Y, and Z? Or is there a full on sermon, if you will, about this person's qualifications, of what they're going to do for black folks, what their political stances are? Or is it basically, hey, I'm the pastor, y'all need to go and vote for Mr. Such and Such or Mrs. Such and Such? Or is it a whole laid out thing where you say, okay, well, we should vote for this guy because this guy is going to do A, B, and C if he becomes mayor, governor, town clerk, whoever?
Well, pastors are not to be endorsers, but I remember back in my youth, again, learning from older preachers. Back in the day, they were simply told to vote the ticket, whatever the ticket was, and that's because a lot of them were unlearned when it came to the nuances of politics. They knew that these black men in particular who were running for political office had in some way a connection to a church, and that was enough. It didn't matter. They were black and they were affiliated with some church. And if they were on the ticket, even if the white man really didn't want them to be on the ticket, but they were on the ticket, then they were going to endorse the ticket. Um, More recently, the shift has been more toward just to get out the vote, um, with true little to no information about where a person identifies politically. In my church, what I try to do is I try to be as balanced as I can. I am more center right. I lean more towards the right on some issues, both socially and politically. But my congregation, most of them are older and they've been voting Democrat their whole life, and they're not going to want to hear anything about anything. They just want to know, is the person a Democrat? Um, and I stopped a long time ago having candidates come to the church and speak from the pulpit or speak from the podium. I acknowledge that they're there. I acknowledge if they're running for a particular position, and I've had a lot of politicians and elected officials speak at my church. You know, um, and I do that as unbiasedly as I can. But when I'm teaching, if I'm asked a specific question about a candidate, then I will give, you know, my whatever knowledge I have, and I do my best to try to be as informed as I can, and I do share that. And from the most minuscule of elections, runoff elections, I'm going to be vocal, during the moments where the pastor makes remarks after the announcements. If if a political uh, if it's a political season or race, I'm going to address it. I want to make sure they're informed. I want to make sure that they know exactly what. I don't necessarily say where people stand. I'm like Tony Evans, who wrote a book, How Christians Should Vote, which was a nice little mini book he pushed that was really balanced and unbiased on how Christians should approach persons who they want to vote for and they're uncertain about voting for. And that's pretty much the same strategy that I use when it comes to politics.
Mm.
National level, unfortunately, there's so much rhetoric and false narratives that you have to wade through and you have to dismantle, because a lot of people, they read the headlines, or they see the 30-second commercial, and that's sufficient for them. And I've been there myself. And getting people to really self-identify outside of the bracket of what they've been conditioned to identify as politically is the challenging part, because you want people to, again, the church is about liberation. You want people to have this liberation idea that rolls over not to the just experience spiritually, but also politically, economically, and educationally, all of the entirety of themselves.
Well, politicians, they pretty much just pander to the church anyway. I mean, it's not like they really care. I mean, they just want some votes, because they're only there every 2 to 4 years. Anytime in between that, you probably won't see them unless it's on television. So I think they're big time panderers as far as the church is concerned.
Which is
I don't want.
this is
Go
why
ahead.
I'm sure that I stay as connected as I can. I want to know not just the politicians in my local arena, but the broader arena. I'm going to be writing senators, congressmen, not just from my state, but also the broader community, because what they do also impacts my church. If they
Mm,
cast a vote in favor or against something that I know will be directly impacting the people that I serve, that's a concern of mine that I have to address.
absolutely. Well, we are here with the good Dr. Lorenzo T. NEAL, pastor of New Bethel AME Church in Jackson, Mississippi. We got a handful of folks in here. If y'all want to ask some questions, you willing to take a few questions, Doc, or
Sure.
do you got to run? If y'all got a few questions for the good Doc, he's willing to answer them. Put them in the chat. I'll put them up on the big board, and the good Doc will answer them to the best of his ability, I'm sure. I appreciate everybody coming here. The few handful of y'all who are here. If you're watching this on the playback, go ahead, hit the like button, and also I'm going to put the good doctor's website in the chat. Let me see. Let me get the link here. I'm also going to do that. Put the good doc's website in the chat. Y'all can go ahead and follow Dr. NEAL and see what he's got going on. Y'all really need to read Dr. NEAL's bio, man. I was really your bio is pretty interesting because I always read people's bios, before they come on, and very interesting. I wasn't even going to bring up the gun violence part, but you volunteered it, and so while I'm waiting for somebody to throw a question in, let me ask you about that, Dr. NEAL.
Mm-hmm.
have you changed the way you think? Have you changed the way you think about people? Because they always say, guns don't kill people, people kill people by using guns, right? Do you think different about people since you've been through, all these gun violence, and you've been through more than one incident of it, since you've been through these multiple gun violence situations? Do you think different of people themselves since then?
Yes, I do actually. It's made me very much more empathetic to persons that I usually wouldn't be empathetic towards. um, and it has helped me really be more human, you know, in my connections and in my interactions with others. I don't like the fact that I know we can be violent people, humans. We can be violent people, and uh, anytime I hear of a death, violent death in particular, I'm grieved. You know, I still had to go through years of therapy, even as I was training to be a therapist. I had to go through that to address the reality of the grief that I was experiencing, that I didn't never expressed. You know, I had no negative expressions of that grief or trauma as a child, and you see your parent killed before you. Uh, Raised by my grandparents, my mother's parents, and I did have interaction with my great grandparents. You know, lived with them for a little bit too. They all whooped my behind. Let me put it that way.
Mm,
Um, and so I have a greater sense of responsibility to help people live, as in Christ says in John 10:10. You know, He came to give life more abundantly. I have a greater sense of responsibility to help people live abundant life, and I do mean live life, because people are dying, and it grieves how they die violent death. The other part of that is I also see how existential crisis can contribute to a sense of dread, angst, and all the other negative connotations of that you can probably articulate. So much so that with Black men, we feel so pressed against the wall that at the slightest matter now, more than ever before, we're willing to take someone else's life to protect our own. And that's a sad, sad thing. And it grieves me that we have to do all of that. They feel they have to do that when, you know, we
I agree.
we got to
I
do better.
agree. Yeah, well, there is and we talk about this a lot, on the internet. We talk about, the lack of men, and in certain pockets of Black society, we talk about the lack of decent fathers inside of Black society to mentor children and raise children and guide children and counsel children. Does the church should the church be pushing more of a message of family and fathers and you know stability? Should there be more of that inside the church's message? And if it was, would it make a difference?
Uh, it should be, but it can't. And I say it can't because unfortunately we have been a breeding ground for that absenteeism that we see in the communities. We, and I speak we as the collective Black church, we have fostered this sense of nihilism. And I go back to that, that says, well, if you don't make it in life, and if you don't make it in the church, you're not going to make it in the life. And that it should never have been. And it's been the case. So people who feel disenfranchised from the church also have this sense of disenfranchisement in their own experience and existence, and they seek to find engagement outside of what they should find in the church. So we have women, you know, getting on OnlyFans because they didn't have the community connection, not a father in a home or anything like that, but just that community connection where they could have had replacement fathers, vicarious fathers, and that has broken down. And we can only blame ourselves for that. That we can only blame ourselves for that. So while we may have a desire to be that, if we don't change our message as well as our methodology and praxis when it comes to worship within and service without, then we'll never be able to see that.
So, do you think it's time for? Because we all see the big preachers, the Jakes, the Creflo Dollars, all these people. Now, should we stop as Black folks giving the church as much money as we give the church? Because, like I said, billions of dollars every year. I mean, one time I remember Creflo Dollar was pitching for another plane. Even though he had one already, he was pitching for another jet because I guess his other jet was too old. I don't know. So should we continue to funnel money into, and it's not a personal slight against you, Doc. I'm talking collectively. Should we as Black people continue to funnel so much money into an institution that doesn't seem to, on the outside, doesn't seem to have the best interests of Black folks in mind?
Well, that should be determined in a localized setting. In a general sense, we know that the churches, there are leaders in the church who exploited the means of generosity that people have afforded them. And as a person who is in full-time ministry, no outside income, well, I lie, I teach now, but for a number of years, no outside income, who solely relied on the church to support me. It's employment, but the people had to give to make sure that the salaries were paid and all of that. At the localized level, we should just be more astute and demand greater accountability for our stewardship. The problem with instances like Creflo Dollar and the plane is that the people have been conditioned to believe that he had to live wealthy. The people had been conditioned that his wealth would be a reflection of eventually their wealth. So the wealthier he and Taffy looked and lived, eventually that would be like Reaganomics, trickle down to them. And so they would give. But at the local level, people should be able to just simply ask where the money going. I don't have a problem. We give weekly statements to our church members. If they ask, they can see a breakdown. We give the full budget before we, as a matter of fact, we have to have our conference has to vote on the budget. Our board has to vote on the budget, but we have to make it public so they can see what every penny we expect to raise and every penny we expect to spend. And the reality is the bulk of that goes to myself. The bulk of the expenditures goes to me, salary, and all my travel, and to our Episcopal and presiding elder leadership in their travel, well, not travel, but their upkeep, and then the rest to our denomination. And it was hard for me when I first realized that, after coming out of bivocational ministry, that the church was paying me, and I was looking, and I'm like, can we redirect this somewhere else? And we found a way. I found a way. We all found a way, rather, to be able to do that. You know, so that uh, I wasn't being overcompensated, and the members felt that there was integrity in the accounting and stewardship. And when that happened, well, people gave freely, and they still give freely. You know, a lot of churches were experiencing during COVID. You know, I was afraid that because we weren't going to be in person, we were going to suffer financially. And the people like, no, we're going to make sure the church floats, and they have made sure the church floats.
Mm.
Uh, but again, we are still very much accountable to them. But at the same time, I have an acquaintance who runs his church like an empire. You know, we're in the same boat. We live off the church. We are both fully employed by the church. And yet, this particular individual, you know, has somewhat of a luxurious lifestyle compared to me. You know, I try to live a little modest, but you know, he has the big house, he has the fancy cars, and he lives off the church. And there are some members in his congregation who, you know, can afford to make sure he does that. And then there are quite a few who give their last dollar every every time they tithe. And that's just a unique construct that's within the black church and the black faith community experience. And it's not just what we call the black church, but you know, it's also in the mosque. It's also in other that may be non-faith communities. It's the same. It's the same thing. People just want to have this that sense that if we're supporting you, that you're doing so right. We're doing so righteously, and that you would do so right. You know, you would make sure that you do righteously. If that makes any
Yeah,
sense.
yeah. Because, I don't think people are bothered by the fact that the pastor, he's doing a job, that's his employment, he gets paid. I don't think people really have a problem with that. What I think people really have the problem with is, they see people tithing they rent money, people putting their light bill money, in the collection plate. And also,
I was
I
there.
think, I think people have a problem with, you know, they're walking 3 miles to get to the church, and the pastor's driving a BMW, and he's jumping out of his BMW with his gold rings on, and his wife's got on a mink coat. And I think those are the things visually that bother some people. I know my father used to say all the time, he used to say one of the biggest turnoffs, son, from Christianity is Christians. And
Yes.
I didn't understand it when I was a kid. He was like, some of the biggest turnoffs from Christianity, son, is Christians. Because they see, the quote unquote Christian folks, and, they see all the BS that, we talked about earlier in the stream, Doc. And they're like, if that's what being a Christian is about, I don't want any parts of it. So, do you think that religion, not just necessarily Christianity, but religion in a whole, can that help black folks? Can that help make more solid families, create more solid families? Can that help the out of wedlock births? Can it help the killings, the shootings, the poverty, all the things that kind of plague certain parts of black society? Is religion going to play a part in fixing some of these things? I guess that's what I'm asking. Is religion going to play a part in fixing some of these things?
Yes. And religion in the broadest sense, yes. Uh, because the construct should always be about um, the commonality of our human experience and our lived experience. And that's one of the biggest things that the church, the black church, uh, did. It provided for black folks that sense of, again, like it's been saying all the time, connection, engagement, and liberation. And when we get back to those foundations, what we will find is It may not end. It won't end all violence. It won't end all uh, on out of wedlock pregnancies. It won't end all domestic violence. It won't end that, but it will give people a greater sense of connection where they will have more reverence for their life and for the life of others. I'm only going to kill somebody if I don't value your life. And if I'm in a community of faith that teaches me that what Jesus said in Matthew 22 when he was approached by this Pharisee lawyer and asked, "What's the greatest commandment?" And Jesus said, "The greatest commandment is to love God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind." And then he followed up and said, "And there's a second one just as equivalent to it: love your neighbor as yourself. On these two hang all of the law and the prophets." Well, we have that sense of community, that that value for others as much as we value God, or we say we value God, and whatever expression we see God to be, then we will see a greater sense of human worth and human value. It's our humanity. It's our humanity that's what the faith is all about. It's about humanity, our connected experience. And when we see that, and the black church again was birthed out of the necessity for individuals who were enslaved and even those who were free but still disenfranchised from the whole of the community, American society. It gave them that means of seeing themselves as worth something. That's why they spend hours in the Bush Harbor, yeah, Bush Harbor, singing and clapping and listening to a preacher, having church service. That's why, as they got more sophisticated and a little more bougie and moved into buildings, they would go 3-4 times a week, twice on Sundays, because it gave them that sense of value. So,
Right. Doesn't look like we have any questions coming down the pipe. So I'm going to let the good doctor go. Once again, everybody, we got Dr. Lorenzo T. Neal in the house, and he is pastor at New Bethel AME Episcopal Church in Jackson, Mississippi. I will be putting his website in the chat like I've been doing earlier. And Doc, I appreciate you coming through it. I got one last question for you, Doc.
All right.
Are you gonna come back at some point?
If you would have me, I'd be glad to. And
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Had me on. I'm honored. Honored.
Absolutely. I appreciate you coming through, Dr. Neal. I got to get you back on, man, because every now and then I think we need to have these conversations. I think transparency is good. The black church is part of black society, whether we like it or not. And I know a lot of us don't like that, but it is part of black society. And it's always good to, have an input from someone who actually, is a pastor, a true theologian, and to hear their perspective, on the black church and the society outside of the black church as well. So once again, Pastor Neal, I appreciate you coming on, brother, man. And I'll see you soon, man. I'm gonna have you back on here, man. I'll come and knocking again, Doc.
Thank you. I'm so honored, and I'm grateful. Thank you so much. It's been a wonderful experience. And I apologize for my dog who just, I don't know.
Oh, my dog in the back acting up too. It's just that y'all can't hear him. But I appreciate you, Dr. Neal, man, and I can't wait to have you back on here, man. Soon. You got to come back soon, Doc.
I'm ready whenever you are.
All right. Peace, my brother. Thank you.
Peace. Blessings.
Yeah, folks, just got off the line with Dr. Lorenzo T. Neal. I told y'all, man, I'm gonna be mixing it up, man. Y'all gonna see some people on here, man, that you haven't seen before. All right, because I actually know a few church folks. I'm gonna have some more religious people up here. But I'm not gonna, let me not say anything. Y'all will just see it. If you come here, You will just see it. What time is it? It's 11:30. Do y'all want to do a small round, or y'all want to discuss it? You want to talk about what you just heard and seen? Let me know. Y'all know how we do it here. Go ahead, and if you want to come through, go ahead and hit me up on the email. It's prophetofthought@yahoo.com. It's prophetofthought, one word, no caps, @yahoo.com. If you want to come through and discuss what you heard tonight, give your input on it. It's up to you. And while I wait for y'all to let me know whether or not you want to come through, give you a few programming notes, because y'all know X likes doing programming notes. Tomorrow, 9 p.m. Eastern Time, my man will be here. Brother Keep It Techie will be in the house, and he will be here talking all things tech. You know, I know y'all familiar with Brother Keep It Techie. Brother KIT has his own channel, and he's also the official timekeeper of the T.P.O.T debates. So have your behinds here tomorrow, 9 p.m. Eastern Time, right here on the T.P.O.T YouTube page. You freaking know, because Brother KIT will be in the house. And then Saturday, we'll be throwing down with a Saturday show, special show, Saturday night. The one and only, For the Record, will be in the house. Brother Third Ward, Lady Topaz, and Brother Bitcoin L will be in the house Saturday night, 8 p.m. Eastern Time, right here on the T.P.O.T YouTube page. Make sure you're here, because if you're not, you already know what I'm going to do. Yeah, so check us out Saturday night. For the Record will be here. And also tomorrow, my man KIT will be in the house as well. So if you want to come through and discuss it, go ahead. Oh, there's my man. I knew he was going to want to come through. I know my man Perfect Black wanted to come through and chop it up about this one. Did you get my message today? Well, I'll wait till he come up here. Because I had hit my man up on the phone and let him know what I was doing. All right, check your email. Check your email. Check your email, Brother Perfect Black. Yeah. Like I was telling the good doctor, I grew up in the church, a lot of us did. I had church people in my family, bishops, my grandfather's was a bishop. My grandmom's was one of the elders in the church, Sunday school teachers and pastors in my family, so I grew up around church and religion and preachers and, at the preachers' dinners and, pastor appreciation day and all that kind of stuff, man. I grew up around all that stuff, man. And, as a kid, you can't really say yay or nay as far as, church goes. Once you get to be like a teenager, you get to be 12, 13 years old, you can be like, look, I don't want to go no more, and that's kind of where I went when I got to be, when I started hitting the double digits, I start becoming less and less interested. Yeah, check your email, man. It might have came up in your spam, Brother Perfect Black. I'll send it again, though. Yeah, I mean, I became less and less interested. I became less and less interested in the church as I got older. And it's crazy because, as you start to get more understanding of the church, I know it was my experience. As I start to get more understanding of church and religion, less interested I became in the church, if that makes any sense. I mean, the more I start to understand, the older I got, the less interested I became in the church, because I thought that the things I was seeing, and I was telling Dr. Neal, the things I was seeing, was like, wait a minute, man, this isn't what this is supposed to be about, you know. Brother Perfect Black,
What's going on, man? Can you hear me?
what's good with it, man? I hit you up today, man. I called you on the phone to let you know what we was doing tonight. Did you get my message?
Oh no, man! If I did, it was a missed call because I've been at work, man. I've been busy, man.
Oh yeah, I know.
Really, really damn busy lately. So, but no, I haven't. Let me see here.
So let me you asking me, Brother Bitcoin L, when the last time I visited a church? I was at one I was at a church 3 months ago, and I went there to work on the backup generator. Yeah, I went there to do some work on a backup generator. But far as like going in and sitting down for a service for 2 hours, man, I can't even.
I haven't did that in years, and actually, that's something that I've this black church thing, man. This is one of the things this is one of my. I love the black community, and when I see the black church as one of the biggest, as a corrosive element in the black community. That's how I see it. That's how I see it. As a financial a source of extraction for the black community. The black church is no better than gentrification. No better. Because they collect billions. I was looking at a blackeconomics.com or code, and they were saying not just 450 billion since 1980, but over the last 10 years, 350 million. So that's like 800 billion since 1980.
Yeah, billion.
And they put all of them. Do you think they put that money in black banks? No, they put it in Bank of America, who then turn around won't give loans to black folks.
Yeah, that's just
Chase Bank, who then won't turn around and give business loans to qualified black folks. So they're no better than gentrification. And I was raised in the like you, and unlike you, when I was 12, I didn't have the right of refusal to go to church. I had to go.
I had to go.
It was no.
I had to go.
I was raised in the straight up old school Pentecostal.
Oh yeah, you get up on Sunday and you're going to that church house.
Sunday, we were in church every day.
Every day.
Young folks meetings. We had to go for everything.
Yeah,
they made us pray before we start to cut the grass.
Yeah, Bible study, all that kind of stuff, man.
Revival,
everything.
Young folk revival. Hey, it was every day was a reason to go to church. Now I was good in sports because playing sports, I had to get the hell away from church. Because I was home when we was going to church. I had an excuse not to playing football, running track. I even tried playing baseball. I tried to score my whole year playing sports just to get out of church. It got to the point, man, that I started reading the Bible just myself, just so I can, countermand my foster father, which I didn't want to get slapped in the face and got whooped when I got home, but hey, it was worth it. Ever since then, man, I've been, and because I see the money that goes inside the church, in the black church, and people wonder why men aren't there. Men, we are, Kevin Samuel say that men, and this is true that we're cost benefit analysis. That's how we think, and we see going to church, giving your money, that's not doing anything. Even those who are within the community and love the community, we see that it's just a source of extraction.
Yeah.
See, Creflo Dollar. I'm in the wrong business.
Yeah.
I mean, ever since the death of King, I think the federal government and they say, you know what, we can't take this no more. We need to give these Negroes something. And you know what they gave us? You know what they gave them? 501c3 tax exemption. That's what they did. Ever since then, they shut the hell up about real political issues of what was really going on in the black community. They haven't spoken for the black community since then.
Yeah, you would think.
Grown since then.
Yeah, you would think. And I asked the good doc about it. What's good, brother AM1? I see you up there, man. And far as non-work related, me visiting a church, brother Bitcoin, man. You talking? I'm trying to think. I got married in a church. All right, I did get married in a church. After that, trying to think. I think I went to a few more weddings in churches, but as far as sitting in there, sitting in the pew, nah, man, I can't even tell you, man. I think the last time I was in a church, I went to a friend of mine's wedding in 2012. That was the last time I was literally sitting, in a church.
I was really stupid with it when I
literally
when I got on my own. I told my foster mother. I said I'm not going back to church. Yeah. I don't see anything in the community. I'm not going back. And I've been back since then. But I've actually, believe it or not, I've been to church for more funerals than I have from actually going just to sit. And the last time I went was when I got married, which was actually last year or so. But before then, I'm not. It's been a long time, years since I've been inside the church. I'm very critical of churches. I'm
me
very,
too.
very critical of the black church, which is another reason why I don't go. Because they do a bunch of prosperity preaching. They do a bunch of preaching that, even the good doctor, he kind of alluded to a lot of this prosperity preaching thing. And that's the reason why. That's the reason why, and people wonder why the men don't want to go. The men aren't going to go to church. They're not seeing it. Why am I giving my money? Now, my wife, she's a big church goer. And I don't have a problem with that. Just can't spend my money going. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to get a church 1 red cent. I said they're going to take your every week. They're giving bit. Do the math on that. I remember doing the math. I forget what the math was every week that the black community was giving up every week to the church. Man, we could have had people complain about the stuff that we don't have. We should look no further than the black church. They have pocketed $800 billion over since 1980. I'm sorry. We should have. You know how much it costs us. You know how much it costs to start a bank? At the very minimum, $2 million. Are you shitting me? Schools. There's no reason we shouldn't have our own schools. There's no reason we shouldn't have several different banks. Hell, we can have our own goddamn sports leagues. But the black church have done nothing but extracted finances from the black community by going to church and saying it's all on God. Not one of them bastards that's in them churches that's preaching in church are actually Christians because they lie on Jesus. Because I've read the Bible backwards and forwards. I don't read Jesus like that. Jesus didn't do that. He didn't cook himself up in a church behind a damn pulpit telling you to give your damn tithe. Look. The church that's right down the street. Just right down the street. I know just right down the street while a big church here in Chicago. They got fucking ATMs up in there. They got ATMs up in there.
That is crazy, man. That is just Well, some churches to become a member, they want to see your tax info and
and
all this kind of nonsense.
speaking of that, they was at because my wife, she's still looking for a church home, and that's good, and one church sent her a because she inquired about it online. Oh, they sent her a nice big package and everything, and then with included in there, something to the effect of asking her how much was she's going to tie to them on a regular basis, and the starting bid was $100, and then went up from there.
Yeah, I mean, I know.
$100.
Yeah, they want to know. They want to know where you. They want to know where you work.
Yeah,
they want to see your tax info
but yet they call themselves Christians. See, Christian means Christ-like.
Yeah.
Every time one of them, and I'm more explicit. Every time one of them bastards say that they are a Christian, they lie on Jesus. Because the way I read the Bible, Jesus was a revolutionary of the Malcolm X type of level. He was not what we see today. He was not custom. Even back in them days, he didn't have custom linen. He wasn't running around in that. Jesus, he had a vow of poverty. Now, I'm not saying that we need to do that, but goddamn, asking your church to buy you a jet when you already got a $1 million jet.
That's just insane, man. I brought that up to Dr. NEAL. I'm like, come on, man.
Well, there's nothing wrong with that. Yeah, my last name is Dollar. I'm a preacher. Like I said, I'm in the wrong business.
Yeah. I think I picked the wrong line of work myself. And I was telling Dr. NEAL, I mean, I'm fine with, the church got to collect a few money because it's got to collect a few dollars because it costs money to run the church. They got lights, they got water, they got gas, they got maintenance and all that kind of stuff. And the pastor, he got to get paid. I get all of that. I don't even have a problem with it. And they got
to that God is going to solve it all. Just what they tell these women about finding a man when they go to church.
Oh yeah, I asked them about that. I asked them about the whole.
They don't even take their own advice when it comes to tithe.
I asked them about that. I was like,
but they tell these women, just pray on it, get on your hands and knees and pray
for your husband.
Pray for your husband. Wait on Jesus. He'll send you a man.
God gonna send me a husband. God gonna send me a husband. I asked them. I said, has the church failed? Has the church failed with because they're telling they're telling these women to just pray for their husband. God gonna send them a husband. To leave it all on God. I said, it just seems like, the church is selling these people, man, these constant delusions that's never going to manifest. I mean, they're just never going to manifest. So, and he said, he pretty much conceded the point that, there should be more preaching of family. There should be more preaching of responsibility. There should be more preaching of, stability, but he also said that it should be, but it can't. It can't be preached, Brother Perfect Black.
Not why they are tax exempt. They can't.
Yep.
Not where they're accepting that tax exemption. Not where they're asking you for a tax exemption letter when you want to give to them as a business.
Yep. That's
where they're bought off.
Yeah. They gotta keep telling. They gotta keep telling women to pray for their husband. They gotta keep saying it. They gotta keep saying it, y'all.
The church is a big reason why people like Kevin Samuels even exist.
Yeah.
It's a big reason.
Yeah.
Why they are like, has he, get that dog, die alone. Or the black church is a good reason why, among other things. They're a good reason why. They're a good reason why. And while a lot of those pastors, they sitting up and seeing a lot of these single women, they're just, they got their pick of the litter.
Oh yeah, I asked him about that too. And I told him, I said, well, you guys are, for some of these women, you are the quasi pseudo husband. You the Sunday husband. They come and see you, every Sunday, and you like you're like the man in their life. You're that once a week husband. You've kind of filled that role for a lot of these women because the bulk of the congregation is women for the most part. I mean, that's just the truth. There's no denying that. I don't care what black church you walk into, you do a head count, boy, the women are going to outnumber the men for the most part. I mean, that's just what it is. So I think with a lot of that, I'm not going to say all preachers, but I think a lot of those pastors and preachers and bishops and whatnot, they rely on that because they know there's not a lot of men, inside the church like that. So they know they have a, somewhat vulnerable congregation because when they're preaching to mostly women for the most part. That's what the preaching is for. The preaching isn't really for men, man. I don't think so.
And women spend money more than men.
Absolutely.
They spend money more than men. They got this faith that God is going to come down and do it all for them, and and the church has not only created a bunch of spinsters, they're feasting on them at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're just feasting on them.
They study dropping that money in that collection plate, paying them tithes on time. I asked him about that. I was like, I don't have a problem with you, getting paid and whatever, because I guess, that is your job. But I think the problem is when you got people putting their light bill money and their rent money in there and, you jumping in and out of your Mercedes and they walking 3 miles, to get to the church to give you the light money and the rent money. I think that's where people kind of have the problems, with the whole church thing, and you talk about a person like Creflo Dollar who literally will get up there on stage and say, hey, y'all, I need another jet.
Mm-hmm. And he ain't the only one. He's just more of the most ridiculous one.
Yeah.
The most extreme case. Yeah, I just get on here and just but all of them are there. I include all the televangelists that way. TD Jakes, they're all in the same boat to me. Because they're not contributing nothing to the black community but a bunch of prosperity preaching. And collecting money while they're at it in their tailor-made suits. Mm-hmm. And again, I challenge them or anybody. I challenge them to look into the Bible and you tell me that that's what Jesus did. This is what Jesus had in mind. This is what Jesus had in mind. This is these type of conglomerate type of churches. This is what he had in mind. Nobody is challenging why it is there's poverty. See, what Jesus did, he spoke on the poverty, but he also spoke to the people as to why they were impoverished. He didn't have the benefit of a tax exemption.
Yeah.
These preachers, they have the benefit of it and they love it.
And
they're browbeating the poor. That's all they're doing. They're browbeating the poor. The focus of their attention is on people who can barely defend themselves against from the powers that be, and they dare not speak against the powers that be, who keeps them impoverished.
Yeah, he also didn't have the privilege of a church the size of a football stadium, where the tens of thousands of people up inside of there, and they all got an envelope full of cash. I don't think Jesus didn't have that either. He didn't
want
it. Yeah.
He didn't want. He said, give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar. Evidently, the church is wholly bought off by Caesar. But hey, the devil did say he's gonna come after you for what in the church. He coming right through the church.
Yeah, I think my main issue my main issue with with the black church is, besides the money and the foolery and all the nonsense that comes along with it, I think my main issue with the black church is the fact that, they have so much power over black people, man. That can't be denied. They have power over black people. They have influence over black people. And I think what happens is they take that power and influence that they have over a certain amount of black society, man, and it's used wrong. If you have so much power and influence over people, man, you would think that they would be using it, to better the people as opposed to, enrich themselves. They would talk about the things I talked about with Dr. NEAL tonight. They would preach on, solid families. They would preach on, not being a baby mama. They would preach on, having your money together. They would preach on, building the quote unquote communities that they're in, et cetera, et cetera. They would preach on that stuff because they have power. They have some degree of power now, and they have a lot of influence. So why isn't that power and that influence, man, being used to do something other than make sure the pastor's wife has a fur coat, make sure the pastor can drive his BMW, and make sure the pastor and his wife and his kids live in the big old mansion on the hill? You would think that power, that influence, and the money that comes into the church would be, some of that power, influence, and money would be focused on the very people where, that is supporting them, that's keeping that church up, that's making sure the pastor can drive that Mercedes, that's making sure his wife can wear that mink coat and those big diamond rings and all this kind of nonsense. I mean, they are literally living off of the people in that pocket of society. They are literally living off those people. So them, more than anyone else, should be, quote unquote, giving back, because they've gotten a lot. They've gotten from black society. So they should be the main ones giving back, because, see, you can only give back if you've gotten something, because we often talk give back, and usually when we're saying giving back, we're talking about people who haven't gotten jack from where you're telling them to give back from. But these churches, man, and these religious organizations, they have directly benefited from these geographical areas, from these pockets of society. They have directly benefited. So they should be the main people giving back to those areas. And it just doesn't seem like they're doing it to me. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I haven't been to enough places. I don't know.
Well, I can tell you why. For me, it's pretty simple. I'm a student of history. Former Attorney General John Mitchell from Nixon's administration. He said, and I've always saw this as kind of like a Freudian slip, because he wasn't even talking to or for black folks in it, but this quote is applicable. He say that you be better informed if instead of listening to what we say, you watch what we do. Now, I know he was talking about politics and all of that, but the reason why, Brother X, that they don't do those things, what you say that they do, is because, in the way I call it, the way I see it, they're not really Christians. They don't even really truly believe in the teachings of Christ. They don't. And why do I say that? Because I'm watching what they do. You can be a deaf man and just watch someone for a few days, and you can tell exactly what's most important to them. What's most important to the black church is not the teachings of Christ. So I hasten to call them Christians. They don't believe in the teachings of Christ, because I'm looking at their actions. I'm looking at the money that they collect in the very communities from which they collected, and I'm looking at the conditions of those very people. They are nothing more than a source of extraction. They are little better than gentrification because they take this money from their people, literally hundreds of millions of dollars every week, and this is just on Sunday, every week, and they go and put it into a white bank. They board themselves up in their homes. They point at the news every week and talk about how bad these young black boys and black girls, how young this bad generation is, and they do fucking nothing about it. And they do it all again on Sunday, rinse, wash, and repeat. And it burns me up. It burns me up to see it. It's the reason. Look, this is the biggest reason why I can't go to church. Oh, I used to love debating with preachers. And quite frankly, to be honest with you, I love indulging Jehovah's Witnesses when they come knocking on my door. It's gotten to the point that they bypass my friend. They bypass my door because I challenge them. What the hell is your church doing in the community? Besides you going to your church or your synagogue or your or wherever you go, and you sit and talk amongst one another with your dogma.
Yeah.
And you challenge nothing to the community. For me, it burns me up. It fucking burns me up to see these people in their suits say that they believe in God, riding around in their Benzes and whatever it is the hell they driving, getting paid all this money with their tax exemption that they jealously guard, careful not to say anything on radio or TV that will raise the antennas of anyone political to who can challenge their tax exemption. It burns me up. So, I was told that once I started, when I started really coming into a lot of, reading and all that, I was told by an elder that, you don't want to take away anyone's peace. No matter how poisonous you think that peace is, you can't take it away from anyone. And too many people in the black community are being poisoned by what they think is peace. In this thing called the black church.
Yeah,
it is a corrosive element within the black community. It's worse than gangs, and it's almost as worse than drugs. It's second only to white supremacy.
That's what I was gonna say, because I mean, you can only be so upset with the institution, the institution of church itself, because, if they don't have these people running there and filling up the collection plates in the tithe box, if they don't have these people running in there by the thousands, the Sunday and Wednesday and Thursday, if they don't have those people, they wouldn't be able to do it. So, I can't get but so upset. Now, I have my issues with the church. Trust me, I do. But isn't part of it is that we are so susceptible, to these pastors and teachings, and we got this Jesus Christ complex and all this kind of nonsense. Isn't that part of it too? I mean, if you put yourself in a position to be taken advantage of, there's no shortage of people that are willing to take advantage of you. So if we put ourselves in a position to be manipulated, to be taken advantage of, put ourselves in a position to be indoctrinated and beaten the head and all that kind of stuff, if we put ourselves in that position, I mean, we can't be but so mad at the people who say, okay, yeah, let me go ahead and beat you in the head. Let me go ahead and indoctrinate you. Let me go ahead and, Jew you out of your money and all this kind of nonsense, because you're putting yourself in that position. So, I don't think it's all the church's fault. I think the ideal of church has a lot of black people enamored because of the Christ complex that we have, and you know, the connection to the quote unquote religious religiosity, if you will, if that ain't even a word, but we got such a connection to it. You know, it's like that's the foundation of many black people, you know, religion, church, you know, all this kind of stuff. So we're kind of brought into it, you know, by our parents, our grandparents, our uncles and aunts, and you know, because they were brought in it by their parents and their grandparents. So it's just like anything else in black society, you know, it's woven into the fabric. You know, it's woven into the fabric of black people, isn't it?
How can I say this? It's woven into the black fabric. Yes, it is. You know, about 2.5 years ago, I spoke to, and I'm not going to say his name. I'm not going to say his name. I'm not going to say the church, but he's really, really huge here in Chicago. Right. I spoke to him for about 10 minutes. And in all fairness, he probably wouldn't even remember me. But I was, you know, I asked him about, you know, supporting some of the things that we do, and asking if he would help spearhead or at least help finance, his church would help finance, you know, some organizations and some ideas around, helping black boys. And he pulled me, I'll never forget this. You know, he pulled me aside. He said, look, everything that you said, I agree with. But he said he couldn't get behind anything like that because he feared it would threaten his church. And this is a huge, huge church here in Chicago that is that has a lot of political weight. So for me, I have to go back to, you know, from what you were saying, you know, to those who much is given and much is expected. These churches, and I speak of the black church as an institution, not just a single church, from the small ones to the big ones. They have a responsibility. They're collecting a lot of money. They're collecting a lot of funds that most people don't even have, and they actually shouldn't be giving it to them. So for me, you're collecting that, and you have the minds of the people. You have a responsibility to do right by them, whether if it hurts you or not. Otherwise, then you don't deserve to be in a position of leadership. And that's what leadership is all about. And that's what I see the black church as. They are leaders. Like it, for better, worse, good or bad, right or wrong, they are big leaders within the black community. I wish it wasn't that way, but because they are, then I feel that people like myself, which is the reason why I'm so critical of them.
Yeah.
Because they do have a responsibility.
Yeah.
They are demanding that people give their tithe. And they give nothing in return. They put the money in the very institutions that are gentrifying their own people. I'm sorry, but that's unforgivable. It's inexcusable. They do this knowing it. And they don't care. Which is why I say they're really not Christians. They don't believe in the teachings and tenets of Jesus. They don't.
Yeah.
They just don't.
They have great power, man. They have great power, and
well, the devil got great power too.
With great power comes great responsibility.
At least the devil is in a lot of ways honest about what he needs, what he wants to do. He seeks to destroy. According to the Bible, he told God and Jesus that. And he's going to use the church to do it. And that's exactly what he's done.
Yeah.
So for me, and I'll say, because I'm going to go to bed, I don't want to keep everybody up. But for me, we in the black community, we're not going to go too far. And I know, in the black manosphere, that's a big deal with me. Because the black men and women relationships it's not going anywhere until that is repaired. And unless and until this issue of the black church is addressed, black men ain't going anywhere. We have to see the black church for what it is a source of extraction, and they need to be avoided. That's just my personal opinion. So long as we're keeping the Klepto dollars and the TD Jakes and all of them, so long as we're keeping them rich, so long as we're giving money to them, the black man ain't going nowhere. We need to be preached to, and they see that as a need, and they are just capitalizing on it.
Yep.
That in and of itself, to me, tells me that they are not Christians, and they just do not believe in the tenets of the very Bible that they carry around. They're just pimping it. That's the reason why I always call them pimps. That's what they are. They're pimps. That's what they
Well,
are.
I appreciate you coming through, brother. I do, man. I mean, I don't know. Just crazy, man. Hey, brother Perfect Black, man, once again, man, I appreciate you coming through, brother, and you already know what it is, man. You're welcome here anytime. My brother.
Right, bro.
I appreciate you, man. Peace. Yeah, y'all, we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna close it out. We're gonna go ahead and close it out, man. Good stuff tonight, man. I got some perspectives on some things, man, that, I kind of knew, growing up, in the church and whatnot, because I was raised by church folks, can't y'all tell? I was raised by church folks. I had pastors, preachers, bishops in my family and the whole nine. I guess that's probably why I'm so disenfranchised with church now, because I got to see it from the inside. I used to be in the back rooms and all that kind of crap, and watching my grandfather, who was a bishop. He had 2 and 3 and 4 girlfriends and whatnot. So, and it goes along with what my old man used to say. He used to say, I was telling Dr. Neal tonight, my old man used to say the biggest turnoff from Christianity is Christians, so that's kind of where it was, for me, far as the church went, man. Like, like I said, and I got married in a church, but I got married to, I got married in a church, and, the church that I got married in, I actually knew, the pastor. I, know the guy, and he, offered to marry us in his church, and, we had the ceremony and all that kind of stuff. Had nothing to do with religion. Absolutely not. I just happened to know the pastor and was able to, use his church for our wedding. I mean, that's just the truth. I ain't even gonna lie, boy. I bring my wife in right now. She'll tell you the same story. Like, we just happen to know, the pastor who had the church, and he, said he would marry us. Pretty much. That's pretty much how that went down. Yeah, he came to the crib and was like, look, man, come on, Rev, you gotta go ahead and, do our wedding for us. And we just start planning around it. Once he said, yeah, we could use his church, we just started planning around it pretty much. Yeah, I mean, but, I was in the Nation of Islam, for a while. I was a Muslim, when I was a younger guy. So I've kind of seen, spirituality and religion from many different angles. So, I'm not too tied into religion anyway, man. I guess because I was raised by religious people. So, I'm not too tied into religion. I told the good doc that tonight. I was got really disenfranchised with religion, man. And like I was telling brother Bitcoin, shoot, man, the last time I was around a church, shoot, I was there working on, a piece of equipment that they had there, like a backup diesel generator. I was there working on that, never even went inside, I mean, Yeah, I have my issues, with the church, as it stands now, but I'm an older brother, who knows, that can change. You see me in 5 years, you know, you might look up and see OX in the church going, Amen. Amen. You might see me up in there, but as it stands right now, you're probably not going to see that, and I say that respectfully. I don't say it as a slight, I say it respectfully. But the good reverend, he was a good sport, and notice y'all, I managed not to use any profanity. Y'all notice that? I didn't use no profanity. I guess because I get to talking with the church folks, I try to mind my manners, because I know a bishop, Bishop Dunlap. Y'all have seen him here. He was on the show a couple years ago. Me and the bishop are actually good friends. He's probably gonna be the next person I bring up here. Yeah, I try to mind my manners, when I'm talking to the pastors and stuff like that. I try to keep it rated PG, y'all. I do. I try to keep it rated G, PG, so it don't get too out of hand. We can have a decent dialogue, because I think it's always good to be able to for two men to have a conversation and no profanity be used. I think that's a good thing, and I'm working on it. I'm working on that thing where every other word doesn't have to be, a piece of profanity. Every other word doesn't have to be something vulgar. So I'm working on it. I'm trying. I'm getting better at it, you know, and having a good doctor in here tonight, man, was good practice. So, hopefully I can continue the trend. But, fingers crossed on that one. But anyway, I want to thank everybody, man, for coming out tonight, man. I appreciate y'all, man. I appreciate the cash apps. I appreciate the super chats and all that stuff, man. But most importantly, man, I appreciate y'all, man, for coming through, hanging out with us tonight. And one more time, man, just one more reminder with these here programming notes. Like I said, tomorrow, my man KIT will be in the house. Brother Keep It Tech will be in here talking all things tech. Then Saturday, the crew will be here. For the Record will be in the house, 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Brother Third Ward, Lady Topaz, and Brother Bitcoin L will be in the house Saturday night. For the Record will be here on the T.P.O.T YouTube page. So, once again, man, I want to thank everybody for coming out, man, hanging out with us, man, spending some time with us. It's always good, man, to be up here with you good folks, man. I don't take it lightly, man, because I don't take you good folks lightly, man. By now, y'all got to know that and understand it. I appreciate Brother Perfect Black for coming through and putting his input in. I had to hit Brother Perfect Black up because I know he wanted to come up here and say something, about about the church. But most importantly, man, I want to thank my guest of honor, Dr. Lorenzo T. NEAL. And once again, Dr. NEAL is the lead pastor at the new Bethel AME Church in Jackson, Mississippi. Get on down to the Doc's website and check him out and see what he's doing there. We're going to have the Doc back, y'all. At some point, he said he'll come back. So we'll get him back in here. I don't know, maybe get him in here for a religious debate. Who knows? We'll see what happens. But like I said, I appreciate y'all coming through tonight, man. And we're going to bail on up out of here. And I will leave you with 3 words, like I always do.
Open your mind.
The good doctor is in the house. good doctor, the good doctor.
Open your mind.
In the house. The good doctor. In the house.
Open your mind.
Only from T.P.O.T. Media. Open your mind.